Hey everybody, how are you? This little video will be on the stock market crash and Hoover, FDR, and the beginning of the New Deal. So, obviously the 1928 election, no signs of any trouble in the economy at all, as the map indicates. Hoover, the Republican, continuing the policies of Mellon, clearly. 444 electoral votes to 87. The nation is still really oblivious to any warning signs at all in the economy. So before I continue, remember, big picture ideas in play here, the distinction between Hoover and FDR. And so the big theme here is really how much or to what extent are Americans comfortable with government intrusion into the private sector? All right, so obviously private sector, our own lives. And so how comfortable are we with that? And as a quick reminder, we know as early as 1791, Washington's administration tariff policies were used to promote and protect U.S. industries. That's intrusion. We know that in the 1860s, government financed railroads, especially the Transcontinental Railroad. Government purchased railroad bonds to finance that. That's intrusion. And then we know during the 1920s, with Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover, and Treasurer Mellon, the government loosened regulations, right? And so they were not in favor of government intrusion in business, right? So that's really kind of the debate. How much is too much or how little is too little government intrusion? So Hoover, again, takes office in 1929. It stated that the economy would continue to grow. And honestly, everything is really, the signs are pointing to, and there's a really good chance that poverty as we know it is done. And clearly, obviously, that never happens. All right. So where's the beginning of the end? All right. So this slide kind of has everything that it's like one-stop shop, everything that you need to have. So I'm not saying one is more important than the other because they're all important pieces of the financial collapse. So unequal distribution of wealth. And so basically that companies put their profits into companies, not wages, and that increased the level of consumer debt, right? So it was the United States society was top heavy. Banking policy or policies. So easy credit, again, that means it is super easy to borrow money. And even if you are kind of risk to paying it back, it was easy for consumers to borrow. And obviously buying stocks on margin was super risky because you only needed to put down 10%, right? And if you buy $1,000 worth of stocks, put down your $100, the bank can ask at any time for that for the rest of the loan, right? So they can call in that loan whenever they want for whatever reasons that they want. Speculation, and again, that's when banks took your money and invested it in the stock market as well. And then probably the biggest impact of all of these runs and foreclosures. When banks started to collapse, when banks started to fail because there really was not any cash, the amount of cash was decreasing, and banks also made poor investments. People started going into the banks and withdrawing their money before the bank would lose it. And that's called a run. So a run on a bank, or when Americans are panicking, going to the banks and withdrawing their money, all right? And obviously foreclosures, when people um, lose their home or property. Tariff policy made it real difficult for any income coming in from overseas. So there is really a cash flow problem. And farm prices, we know that because of World War One was super friendly to farmers. The 20s were not. So overproduction and foreclosure. Um, so when the stock market does crash and there's a lack for new goods, um, that's going to cause massive unemployment, which we'll get to in a moment. All right, but just this slide right here is kind of showing the wages between your workers and your farmers. Was the huge disparity already. Um, so again, Americans seem oblivious to these warnings, as evidenced by this picture of the Patriot softball program. Everyone's having a super fun time at the ballpark. So again, 1929. Yeah, things are. This is the calm before the storm. So this is like uh, it's catching most Americans off guard. Again, Hoover was like the first graduating class of Stanford. So congrats him and the Cardinal. All right. So um, one of the criticisms of President Hoover, one Republican, was that he really didn't do much for the economy when when cracks started to appear. And so it's easy to say, well, Hoover did nothing for the people and FDR did everything. So I'm here to show otherwise. So President Hoover, in 29, started something called the Agricultural Marketing Act, which what he was going to do was the government would give loans to farmers to help solidify the shaky financial situation for farmers, right? And they would purchase surplus crops. So that's what that act was supposed to do. It did not work, but the act was going to purchase crops from farmers. Bureau of Reclamation. Right. So one of the things that you're going to learn about in Chapter 21 is the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, which built all these dams in rural Tennessee and northern Georgia to bring electricity. And those dams are still functioning today. All you have to do is go with the Mazuka family road trip to northern Georgia, and you'll see a bunch of these dams. But Hoover suggested the Bureau of Reclamation preparing blueprints for dams long before FDR introduced these. And so the difference between Hoover and FDR, the Bureau of Reclamation, these blueprints were going to be for private companies. And again, dams bring electricity. They were going to be for private, where FDR's TVA is going to be government. And so we'll talk about that in the 32 election. And then private retirement insurance. So basically, the Hoover suggested to insurance executives that retirement plans should be offered for $50 a month for people that would need it. And so this is a precursor to the Social Security Act. So Hoover was on to something. We all know when super wealthy people who play the stock market, they're way ahead of the game than most Americans. And so in October of 29, when there were when the forecast of stocks in the economy was not doing so well, wealthy investors started to just sell, which of course causes stock prices to drop. All right. So that's kind of what Black Thursday is. That so much stock was being sold that prices just bottomed out. And if you were unfortunate enough to purchase at a high price, your stocks has lost value. And if you borrowed money, as it says here, consumers who bought a margin were unable to repay the loans. So if you borrowed money to play the stock market and you didn't know what you're doing, and next thing you know, your stocks that you purchased plummeted in value, the bank's going to ask you for your money. But that money you did not have that money. And so this is going to lead to massive losses in stock prices, and then ultimately production. And I would say on this slide, the key factor for you is unemployment. That's the number one problem during the 1930s. When you have 1/4 of the labor supply, labor force unemployed, that's not including farmers, by the way. Now we are at, we are in dangerous territory. And honestly, during COVID, those numbers kind of reached that same as well. So we are kind of mimicking some aspects of the 1930s. So Hoover his philosophy, and make no mistake, his philosophy was asking corporations to not lay off workers, try to keep wages as high as possible. He also asked that industries maybe create part-time work so people wouldn't lose their jobs. But he was against direct relief. So direct relief basically means money, kind of like the stimulus checks from the government today for COVID. That's direct relief. The government is giving you money. That fundamentally, that was against Hoover's philosophy. That was against the Republicans' philosophy. That sounds like socialism. And so Hoover was against that. He asked local charities to help pick up the slack. The whole house was jammed with people who lost their homes. So he was asking churches, social workers, so local communities should give the relief, not the federal government. It became so bad that all the homeless started to just congregate in parks and cities and just create their own little towns, nicknamed Hoovervilles, which is a negative connotation. So these started to pop up around 1930s. In Grant Park, and I'm sure you all remember during the 1990s when we all went to Grant Park for the Chicago Bulls rallies for all those rings that they won. Grant Park was Hooverville for Chicago during the 1930s. That's where people just made scrap houses out of whatever, and that's where they kind of lived. So the general population was starting to turn against Hoover because they felt that he betrayed them. He let them down. So these are just historic images of the poor. Here's where this is where it's bad. When the Soviet Union is sending job applications to the Americans, right? Whenever people say, oh my God, the Soviet Union, that might be the best option, things are problematic. If we even are contemplating communism. So this tells you that times are not normal. All right. So I want to point you to the bottom of this slide where it says the RFC, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. That is evidence enough for you to say to some extent President Hoover did try to use government money to stop the Depression. And so he gives $1.5 billion in loans to banks and businesses, not to people, not like the stimulus checks today with COVID, but $1.5 billion in loans to the banks. So Republicans were kind of upset with Hoover because they said that sounds a lot like socialism. Again, Hoover's a Republican. The Democrats said they kind of referred to the RFC as the millionaire's dole, D-O-L-E. And if you remember your ancient Rome, the dole was D-O-L-E. That was money directly from the government to the people. So if you're on the dole, that's another term for welfare. So the Democrats criticize this as the millionaire's welfare. So Hoover does try to address the problems. He also suggests a public works program, but